The morning mist hangs thick over the Solomon Islands as amphibious vessels tear through the surf, their engines roaring above the sporadic thunder of enemy guns still positioned in the distant highlands. This insignificant dot of land, overlooked by most cartographers, is moments away from becoming the proving ground for a revolution in military capability that will reshape the very nature of modern combat. Lieutenant Commander William McClure pushes through waist-high water, clutching a sealed container of engineering plans against his chest. At 38 years old, McClure carries himself less like a naval officer and more like the construction supervisor he was in civilian life, and there's good reason for that. His pre-war years were spent creating bridges and interstate systems during America's economic collapse. The 357 men of the 47th Naval Construction Battalion who follow him onto the sand have faces marked by resolve and something else entirely: the unshakable certainty of professionals who've learned to accomplish the impossible. These men aren't your standard military personnel. Their average age sits at 37, making them old enough to have fathered the young Marines who cleared this beachhead just hours before. They're skilled tradesmen from every corner of America: electricians who wired Chicago's buildings, crane operators from the Texas oil fields, master carpenters from the Pacific Northwest. Men who built the nation's infrastructure during peacetime, now assigned a task that borders on fantasy: construct a complete fighter base from virgin jungle and solid coral in mere days, not months. McClure glances at his timepiece. 3:15 in the afternoon. The landing zone is secured for now, but Japanese spotters in the elevated terrain are transmitting coordinates back to their command posts. Each passing minute strengthens enemy positions, provides more time for reinforcement and preparation. American bomber formations need fighter protection for their strikes against Japanese installations on Bougainville to the north. Without this airstrip operational, those bombers face certain slaughter flying unprotected into enemy airspace. McClure studies the impenetrable wall of tropical forest ahead, massive hardwood trees reaching 150 feet skyward, their root systems fused with coral formations harder than poured concrete. A single question dominates his thoughts: how do you construct something requiring months of work in just days while artillery shells rain down on your position? But what McClure and the Japanese observers tracking his movements from their mountain vantage points cannot yet grasp is that they're about to experience something that will revolutionize warfare's fundamental tempo. Something so extraordinary that enemy radio operators will face skepticism from their own commanders when filing reports. Something that will shatter an entire military philosophy predicated on the belief that airfield construction requires half a year, destroyed in little more than a week. The Seabees are about to demonstrate that American industrial capacity isn't limited to mainland factories and coastal shipyards. It's the capability to deploy that industrial dominance anywhere on the planet, transforming any patch of Earth into a launch platform for aerial supremacy at a pace that defies rational comprehension. What unfolds next will leave Japanese military planners wrestling with a question that continues to perplex strategic thinkers decades later. How do you counter an adversary capable of converting any seized territory into an operational threat practically overnight? To appreciate the magnitude of what's coming, you need to understand the Japanese military perspective in 1943. Their entire defensive architecture across the Pacific rests on one critical calculation: time. When Americans seize an island, Japanese strategists know they possess months, perhaps 6 full months, before it transforms into a functioning airbase. This isn't speculation or hopeful thinking. It's rooted in concrete experience and established construction timelines. In the hills overlooking Vangunu, Captain Hiroshi Yamamoto of the 8th Fleet Intelligence Section observes through field glasses as American landing craft disgorge their unusual cargo. Unlike conventional military formations, these men immediately begin offloading earth-moving machinery, bulldozers, and industrial-scale generators. Yamamoto recognizes the pattern. He personally oversaw 6 months of construction on the Japanese airstrip at nearby Munda using conventional techniques, conscripted labor forces clearing vegetation manually, transporting soil in wheelbarrows, and fragmenting coral with handheld sledgehammers. The Japanese methodology for airfield development is systematic, almost ritualistic. Survey teams spend weeks documenting terrain features. Labor battalions then clear jungle vegetation tree by individual tree, incinerating the debris through controlled burns. Coral and stone are fractured manually, sorted by hand, and relocated through human chain formations. The process demands intensive manpower, but produces proven results. Their airfields are permanent, durable installations engineered to function for generations. Yamamoto transmits his assessment to Fleet Command. Americans deploying construction machinery. Project 4 to 6 months until airfield becomes operational, matching established timelines. The response crackles through his radio receiver. Continue surveillance. Conduct artillery harassment when opportunities arise. Prioritize destruction of their heavy equipment. But as the afternoon advances, something begins to register as fundamentally different. The sounds emanating from the American position aren't what Yamamoto anticipates. Instead of the rhythmic chopping of hand axes and the crackling of clearing fires, he hears diesel engines operating at maximum output, the sharp crack of explosive charges, and something else, the distinctive whine of industrial machinery running at peak capacity. Down at the landing site, McClure's Seabees are implementing something the Japanese have never encountered: American industrial warfare doctrine. These men didn't acquire construction expertise in military academies. They learned building the Hoover Dam, laying the Pennsylvania Turnpike, erecting Manhattan's skyscrapers. They think in deadlines, efficiency metrics, and completing tasks ahead of schedule. Seaman First Class Tony Rizzo, a demolition specialist from Boston's massive infrastructure projects, evaluates the jungle wall with professional assessment. Where Japanese engineers perceive months of careful clearing, Rizzo sees straightforward mathematics. We require a cleared zone 3,300 feet in length, 150 feet in width. That represents approximately 500 trees, predominantly hardwood species. Strategic dynamite placement at the base can fell 20 trees in one detonation. He pauses, running calculations. We can clear the entire construction zone in 6 hours. The Japanese have never witnessed this approach because it demands something their military structure lacks: abundant explosives, heavy machinery, and personnel trained to utilize both without constant supervision. American Seabees don't await orders. They identify problems and implement solutions. When Petty Officer Jim Morrison's bulldozer breaks through a coral shelf and exposes a natural drainage channel, he doesn't submit a report and wait for revised plans. He immediately reconfigures the entire runway alignment to exploit the discovery. By nightfall on July 30th, something unprecedented is occurring on Vangunu. Portable generators power floodlights that transform darkness into daylight. Construction noise continues around the clock. Japanese artillery attempts to disrupt operations, but the Americans simply work around the incoming fire. When shrapnel damages a bulldozer, the Seabees remove it from the work zone and continue operations. When coral dust clogs filtration systems, they devise field solutions instantly. Captain Yamamoto transmits to headquarters again, uncertainty creeping into his voice. American construction advancing at exceptional velocity, industrial equipment operating continuously, requesting verification of standard airfield construction estimates. The response arrives swiftly and definitively. Maintain current projections. Americans cannot substantially accelerate conventional construction methodologies. But the Americans aren't employing conventional construction methodologies. They're implementing something revolutionary: the assembly line principle applied to military engineering. Just as Henry Ford transformed automobile manufacturing by decomposing complex operations into simplified, repeated tasks, the Seabees have revolutionized airfield construction. Specialized teams operate in coordinated succession. Alpha Team clears jungle using explosives and bulldozers. Beta Team immediately follows, grading and leveling the cleared terrain. Charlie Team lays coral foundation while Delta Team installs drainage infrastructure. It's industrial choreography executed at a scale humanity has never witnessed. By July 2nd, just 72 hours into operations, Japanese reconnaissance aircraft report something headquarters initially dismisses as impossible. A rough airstrip is already taking recognizable form. The jungle that stood impenetrable 3 days earlier has been replaced by an expanding scar of white coral and disturbed earth. American supply vessels arrive daily, offloading not merely construction materials, but prefabricated components, steel matting sections, premixed concrete, even portable fuel distribution systems.
The psychological impact on Japanese observers is crushing. Their entire strategic framework assumes they possess months to prepare for each new American airbase. Defensive fortifications are constructed around this timeline. Reinforcement schedules are calculated based on it. Supply networks are established assuming it. Now, watching impossible construction velocity unfold beneath them, a terrifying realization crystallizes. If Americans can build airfields this rapidly, then every island they capture becomes an immediate threat. The Pacific Ocean, once Japan's protective barrier, is transforming into a highway for American air supremacy. And they have no conception that the most shocking revelation is still approaching. July 3rd, 1943. 600 hours. The fourth day of what military historians will record as the Vangunu miracle. Steam rises from the construction site as tropical sun burns through morning mist, exposing something that shouldn't exist. A nearly complete airfield carved from solid jungle in under 96 hours. The sound is overwhelming. A symphony of diesel engines, pneumatic tools, and controlled detonations audible 5 miles distant. Lieutenant Commander McClure stands at what will become the runway's center point, coral dust coating his uniform like flour on a baker. Around him, his Seabees work with the concentrated intensity of men aware they're creating history. But it's the radio communications crackling from Japanese positions that reveals the true significance of what's transpiring here. Command, this is Observation Post 3. American airstrip now measures approximately 2,000 feet. Repeat, 2,000 feet. Request verification of timeline projections. The voice belongs to Captain Yamamoto, and for the first time in his military career, doubt infiltrates his reports. The response from Japanese headquarters arrives swift and sharp. Impossible. Maintain observation. Provide photographic documentation. What Yamamoto observes through his field glasses contradicts every assumption about warfare his military training instilled. The Americans aren't merely constructing an airfield, they're manufacturing one. Like some vast outdoor factory, specialist teams work in perfect coordination. When a bulldozer encounters unexpected bedrock, explosives experts are already positioned with shaped charges. When coral requires compaction, steamrollers materialize as if materialized from thin air. When drainage becomes problematic, pipe-laying crews appear with prefabricated solutions. Chief Petty Officer Frank Tank Thompson, a former supervisor on the Golden Gate Bridge, surveys the operation with professional satisfaction. Back in San Francisco, he shouts above the machinery noise to a nearby marine observer, "We relocated 83,000 tons of steel constructing that bridge. Here, we're moving 200,000 tons of coral in 1 week. Same principles, different application." The statistics are staggering. In 72 hours, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion has relocated enough earth to fill 15,000 dump trucks. They've detonated over 500 explosive charges with surgical precision, removing massive trees without compromising the underlying coral foundation, essential for the runway base. They've installed 3,200 feet of steel matting, each section precisely fitted like components of an enormous puzzle. But it's not merely the velocity that's shocking the Japanese. It's the organization. American construction proceeds with the precision of Swiss watchmaking. When Seaman Rizzo's demolition team completes clearing a section, bulldozer operator Petty Officer Jake Collins is already positioned to begin grading. When Collins completes his grading, the steel mat crew, led by Chief Morrison, stands ready to begin laying runway surface. No wasted motion. No waiting for instructions, no confusion about individual responsibilities. Japanese observers have never witnessed anything comparable because their military functions on different foundations: rigid hierarchy, detailed planning, methodical execution. The American approach appears chaotic from a distance, but close examination reveals something far more dangerous: controlled chaos directed by men who comprehend both their individual responsibilities and the overall objective. July 5th delivers the moment that changes everything. A damaged F-4U Corsair limping back from a strike on Bougainville with smoke trailing from its engine spots the white scar of Vongunu's new airfield. The pilot, Lieutenant Bobby Morrison, no relation to the CB chief, makes a decision that will reverberate through military history. He attempts an emergency landing on an airfield that officially doesn't yet exist. The radio crackles with urgent transmissions. Unknown airstrip, this is Navy 47 requesting emergency landing. Repeat, requesting immediate emergency landing. McClure seizes the radio handset, his pulse racing. The runway isn't finished, still requires final grading on the approach end, still missing proper lighting, still lacking fuel systems. But a fellow American is in jeopardy, and that's all the justification any CB requires. Navy 47, this is Vongu Construction Control. You are cleared for emergency landing. Runway is operational. Repeat, runway is operational. What happens next unfolds in slow motion for everyone watching. The Corsair approaches from the south, its engine coughing and sputtering. CBs scatter from the runway as the fighter descends lower, until its wheels contact the coral surface with a spray of white dust. The aircraft rolls to a stop just 300 yards from the runway's terminus. Lieutenant Morrison climbs from his cockpit, kisses the ground, and approaches McClure with a grin splitting his oil-stained face. "Sir, I don't know how you constructed this field so rapidly, but you just saved my life." McClure checks his timepiece. July 5th, 1943, 14:30 hours. Exactly 4 days, 18 hours, and 15 minutes since the first tree fell on Vongu Island. From his observation post, Captain Yamamoto watches this impossible scene unfold through binoculars that suddenly feel impossibly heavy. An American fighter has just landed on ground that was impenetrable jungle less than 5 days earlier. He reaches for his radio with trembling hands. "Command, this is Observation Post 3. American airstrip now measures approximately 2,000 feet. Repeat, airstrip is operationally complete. Timeline projection was..." He pauses, struggling with the implications. "Incorrect, by approximately 5 months." The silence from headquarters extends for long seconds before the response crackles back. "Photographic documentation, prepared detailed report, request immediate strategic reassessment." But the shockwaves are only beginning. Within hours of Morrison's landing, American transport aircraft begin arriving with fuel, ammunition, and maintenance personnel. By July 7th, a full squadron of Corsairs is operating from Vongu. By July 9th, exactly 9 days after construction commenced, American fighters flying from the impossible airfield are providing escort for bombing runs deep into Japanese-controlled territory. The psychological impact on Japanese forces is devastating. Radio intercepts reveal growing alarm in enemy communications. American construction capability exceeds all projections. Previous timeline assumptions invalid. Request immediate revision of all defensive calculations. In military ministries across Japan, staff officers frantically revise strategic doctrines that suddenly seem as obsolete as cavalry warfare. If Americans can transform any captured island into an operational airbase in days rather than months, then the entire concept of defensive depth in the Pacific becomes meaningless. One intercepted Japanese naval communication, decoded weeks later, captures the magnitude of their shock. Enemy construction methods suggest industrial capacity beyond our comprehension. Previous assessments of American capabilities were fundamentally flawed. Recommend immediate strategic reassessment of all Pacific defensive positions. As the sun sets on July 9th, McClure's exhausted CBs watch American fighters take off from their runway for evening patrol. In 9 days, they've accomplished something Japanese military planners believed impossible. They've proven that American industrial might isn't confined to factories in Detroit or shipyards in Norfolk.
It can be projected anywhere American forces establish a foothold. But most significantly, they've introduced a new weapon into the Pacific War, the weapon of speed itself. Lieutenant Commander Bill McClure never returned to his hometown of Detroit. He was killed 3 months later during the Bougainville assault, leading his Seabees in constructing another impossible airfield under enemy fire. But the legacy of those 9 days on Vangunu would outlive every participant. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was immediately and catastrophic. Within weeks of Vangunu's completion, intercepted enemy communications revealed a complete overhaul of Japanese defensive strategy. The assumption that captured islands required months to become operational threats had been the foundation of their Pacific defense architecture. Now, every American landing became an immediate crisis. Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, no relation to the captain who witnessed Vangunu's construction, reportedly told his staff after receiving intelligence reports about American construction capabilities, "We are not fighting an army or a navy. We are fighting an entire industrial nation that can reshape the Earth itself to serve their military requirements."
The ripple effects spread across the Pacific like shockwaves. American commanders, emboldened by the Seabees' success, began planning more aggressive island-hopping campaigns. Why spend months reducing heavily fortified positions when you could simply bypass them and create new airfields in their rear? The entire strategic landscape of the Pacific War shifted in those 9 days on a tiny jungle island most people had never heard of. But perhaps the most profound impact was on the Seabees themselves. Word of the Vangunu miracle spread through every Naval Construction Battalion in the Pacific. The impossible had become possible, and suddenly impossible was just another word for hasn't been attempted yet. On Tinian, Seabees would build the world's largest airfield complex, 6 runways capable of launching 500 B-29 bombers in less than 2 months. On Iwo Jima, they would repair battle-damaged runways in 40 minutes while Japanese artillery shells fell around them. The 47th NCB received the Presidential Unit Citation for their work at Vangunu, but the real recognition came from an unexpected source: enemy propaganda. Tokyo Rose, in her nightly broadcast to American forces, began referring to the Seabees as the devils who move mountains. It was intended as an insult. The Seabees wore it as a badge of honor. Today, when you observe rapid deployment of military infrastructure anywhere in the world, airfields in Afghanistan appearing seemingly overnight, forward operating bases materializing in remote locations within days, you're witnessing the direct descendants of techniques pioneered by McClure's men on Vangunu. The U.S. military's ability to project power rapidly to any point on Earth traces its roots directly back to those 9 days in 1943. But the story of Vangunu represents something larger than military history. It's the story of American industrial culture applied to warfare. The belief that any problem can be solved with sufficient ingenuity, determination, and hard work. The Seabees didn't just build airfields. They built a new way of thinking about what's possible when free people apply their minds to solving a problem. Modern military historians still study the Vangunu construction as a masterclass in rapid deployment capabilities. But perhaps more importantly, it stands as proof of something that authoritarian regimes consistently underestimate: the power of individual initiative multiplied by technological superiority and industrial capability. The Japanese weren't just shocked by American construction speed, they were shocked by American thinking. Their rigid hierarchical approach to problem-solving couldn't compete with the improvisational genius of men trained to see obstacles as puzzles to be solved rather than barriers to be endured. In 2019, when the U.S. military began developing new concepts for expeditionary advanced bases in the Pacific as part of modern strategic competition, the first historical example cited in planning documents was the 47th Naval Construction Battalion at Vangunu. 76 years later, the same principles that shocked Japanese commanders continued to shape American military doctrine. The jungle has long since reclaimed Vangunu's coral runway. Tropical vegetation grows through the steel matting that once launched American fighters into combat. But the lesson of those 9 days endures. In warfare, as in life,
Speed of execution can be as decisive as overwhelming force. So the next time you hear someone say something can't be done, or it's impossible, or it takes too long, remember Lieutenant Commander McClure and his 357 Seabees who proved that impossible is often just a failure of imagination. Because sometimes the difference between victory and defeat isn't who has the biggest army or the most advanced weapons. Sometimes it's who can turn impossible into inevitable in 9 days or less.